Revolution. At the sound of the revolver, buildings torn down, cities burst into flames in order to restore power in the hands of the people. People who have a gun in their hands and a guillotine running around their house, that is. Basis of an ideology for the people who made the ideology, that is. But all irony aside, revolution is a powerful tool, and it is often believed that England didn't have one, unlike countries such as France, but that is far from the truth. England had not just one revolution, but two, but they're not political, but rather economic. Hello and welcome back to Katrapindalka, where we bring all the latest stuff from around the globe to you directly in your house. In last week's video, we looked at the socioeconomic development of the United Kingdom, looking at feudalism. We left off with the dissolution of the monasteries. Be sure to check out that video if you haven't already. The dissolution of the monasteries led to the rise of the gentry, a commercial farming landowning class who bought land that was sold off after the monasteries were dissolved and used that for farming. Around the mid-17th leading up to the 19th century was something called the Agricultural Revolution. There is a lot of dispute about the Agricultural Revolution and whether figures such as Lord Townshend, which lots of people praise as household names, should actually be deemed responsible for the Agricultural Revolution, and ideas that it's not so much a revolution but just a gradual cultural shift. The gist of what happened from what the sources I've read is this. A key part of the Agricultural Revolution was the Norfolk Forkers crop rotation, which does not refer to the time I got an extra side of lamb shank along with my fish and chips in the Lions Inn in Great Yarmouth. The Norfolk Forkers crop rotation is rather a farming cycle which involves planting wheat in the first year, followed by turnips in the second year, barley in the third year, and clover ryegrass in the fourth year. Originally, farmers used a 2-course and then later a 3-course rotation, but the key thing of the 4-year crop rotation is the addition of turnips. Turnips allow the farmers to grow a plant while simultaneously reintroducing nitrogen to the soil. Now, the reintroduction of nitrogen to the soil allows for the soil's fertility to improve and also allows farmers to make more crops during the year as they're growing turnips, which they can sell, as well as having a great yield of barley, clover, ryegrass, wheat, and other crops they farm, which gives them more money and gives more food for the people, which leads to an agricultural boom. Along with this was the introduction of selective breeding. Selective breeding meant farmers could now breed males and females with the ideal traits, just producing more meat, more milk, or more offspring, and producing offspring which are greater adapted to produce more milk, more meat, and more offspring, thus increasing the productivity of their livestock and ensuring that they can make more commercial money, as well as providing the population with what they want. What's that? You want more wheat? I'm sorry, this year's turnip season. There was also enclosure movement. The enclosure movement involved set hedges that define the boundaries of open spaces to ensure that more farmland could be brought into agricultural use, as well as reducing crop disease and increasing efficiency. However, there is some dispute about whether if this act of enclosure brought through Parliament restricted poor agricultural classes from using their farmland and forcing them into cities. The last major development in the agricultural revolution was machinery, with stuff such as the horse hoe, which removed weeds from crops, and the seed drill, which increased crop abundance, both of which believed particularly to be built by Jethro Tull. But of course, that's just scratching the surface, because what was about to happen next would be massive. Around 1750, most of the UK's industry was domestic, around 70%, but that was all about to change due to a poor boy from Preston who came knocking on the door. By the mid-1700s, Richard Arkwright had already moved out of his poverty and earned a name for himself in the wig-making business. Powdered wigs were all the rage back in those days. However, he began to develop an interest in cotton making. In 1767, Arkwright built his first ever spinning machine with John Kay, and he got a patent for it and built a multi-story factory in Cromford in Derbyshire. Arkwright quickly realized that his machines ran better on water power instead of horsepower, and as a result added water wheels to his mills, and his spinning machine became known as water frames as a result. By the 1800s, hundreds of people were employed in Arkwright's factories, and thousands more in other similar factories, and thus Arkwright became the father of the modern factory system. In the early days, people had to work 2 13-hour shifts per day in Arkwright's factories, and conditions were tough. Another major pusher for the UK's rapid expansion was its definitely non-exploitative friendly trading club known as the British Empire. But all joking aside, the UK's role as being such a great imperial power, thanks to its strong navy and disassociation from mainland politics due to being an island, allowed it to extract goodness from across the globe, raw materials such as sugar, cotton, and able to put them into the factory systems in the UK and produce shirts, stuff, and other products for you British people to enjoy, as well as make money out of, and make it one of the richest countries in the world at the time. Colonial advisor John Sullivan famously said that under their own dynasties, all the revenue that was collected in a country was spent in that country. Our British system acts very much like a sponge, drawing up all the goodness from the banks of the Ganges and squeezing them onto the banks of the Thames. All the money coming in from all of this import and all the jobs created by all of these factories and businesses booming, and economic growth was soaring out of the roof. But there is a limit to all of this. On a more sad note, aspiring farmers moved into the big city in order to earn higher income from factory jobs. And yes, they did earn more, but living conditions and work conditions were tough. People were forced into slums in areas like East London, with 20 people to one house, with limiting rations and really poor hygiene conditions. And the work environment wasn't that much good either. Low-paying jobs, people didn't know how to use the machines, poor safety, no sick pay. Even children were forced to work in factory jobs, including the infamous chimney sweepers, while children often found themselves getting stuck in the chimneys and just being left there and replaced with another child. As a result, many children were pushed to pick a pocket or two and steal from tom-tugs, which is what they called rich, foolish people, when they were able to trick with tools such as the sick kid trick, where they rubbed soap on themselves in order to collect donations for their sickness, and used this to make ends meet for their family. The hardships of people in these conditions were portrayed by authors such as Charles Dickens, and it has had a great cultural impact on the United Kingdom and even the globe across itself. One of the most biggest cultural contributors that this area has had on culture is that of Cockney rhyming slang, which must make you scratch your barnet fence and you tumbling down the apples and pears, but it's a hint of code words with words such as stairs being rhymed with stuff like apples and pears, and stuff like hair being rhymed with barnet fair, that allow little thieves to escape cops. Even worse than that was the triangle slave trade, which involved kidnapping people from West Africa and shipping them over to the Caribbean to forcibly pick cotton with no sort of human rights whatsoever, and being treated as objects, and then that cotton being imported just for British people's happiness. The triangle slave trade helped power the empire, but the conditions for the slaves were so awful we can't even discuss them here. The tea, a spritz, so lovely drink at 4 p.m. sharp every day, was a huge craze back in the 1800s, and had to be imported from China. Of course, China didn't want to trade with us, and so we forcibly addicted them to opium formed in India, so we would force them to trade their tea with us with opium. But luckily, Britain's heroes do not only lie in Cadbury's factory in Bourneville, but across the country. And one such hero was William Wilberforce. Wilberforce was a former MP, along with many of his supporters, such as former Prime Minister and the youngest Prime Minister ever, William V Younger, due to their great religious conviction, campaigned hardly for the abolition of slavery. And though he died before he could see it, this resulted in the abolition of slavery in 1807 and the passing of the Slave Trade Act in 1833 that ended the triangle slave trade once and for all. Another one of Great Britain's heroes, other than the Cremek Twisted, is Lord Shaftesbury. In 1842, Shaftesbury sent out a royal commission to go down into coal mines and investigate the working conditions for the people there, and talking to all sorts of people who work there, including young children. Shaftesbury was so appalled by the idea of child labour, and he set out this commission to investigate it. And his work resulted in the 1842 Mines Act, which banned all women, girls and boys under 10 from working underground. But Shaftesbury went further, and in 1847 catalysed the passing of the 10 Hours Act, which restricted working hours to 10 hours, which is why you guys still work your 9 to 5 today. Shaftesbury also campaigned against use of chimney sweeps, which were completely banned in 1875. He also was a member of the General Public Board of Health and helped bring forth public health improvements. Lord Shaftesbury also to the Ragged Schools Union during his time out of Parliament, and helped provide free education for destitute children and children in the working class. He also helped introduce the 1851 Lodging Act, described by Charles Dickens as one of the greatest acts ever to proceed out of Parliament that allowed local authorities to have the power to restrict the number of people who are able to live in one building, introducing segregation in common lodgings for men and women, and ensuring proper sanitary conditions in those areas. If you ever go to Piccadilly Circus, you will see the statue of what is believed to be Eros in the centre, the Greek god of love, or in Roman terms, Cupid, but that is actually Anteros, the Greek god of requited love, and the statue was built in honour of Lord Shaftesbury and his work, as well as the street of Shaftesbury Avenue being named after. But let's check back in with the revolution, and it's going great. After Arkwright's factories comes another great advancement. Trains. Personal favourite of mine. George Stephenson's rocket passes his rainbow trials, and he helped set up the first ever railway. Railways spread like rapid fire across the United Kingdom as they help improve the movement of people and goods and services. Journeys that used to take days, now only mere hours, and this greatly helped improve business across the country, as well as introducing key manufacturing centres in places such as Manchester and Birmingham. Another key transport expander at the time was Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who helped build the Great Western Railway with its unique broad gauge instead of the normal narrow gauge. He also helped design Paddington Station. He helped build the Brunel Thames Tunnel, which is now part of the Overground. He also helped build bridges, such as the Clifton Suspension Bridge and the SS Great Eastern Ship, which went all the way to the US. The Victorian era was filled with a ton of great inventions that helped boost the country and its economic growth forwards, a large list of which I will now attempt to fully state in under 30 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. The water-frame spinning machine, power loom, steam engine, molten steel, automobiles, petrol, tyres, bike, concrete, tarmac, rubber wheels, light bulbs, typewriters, radios, telephones, telegraphs, films, flashbulb cameras, vacuum cleaners, toilet paper, post boxes, stamps, aspirin, anesthetics, electric lamps, locks, toilets, sewing machines, x-rays, comics, ice cream in a pot, Easter eggs, rockets, train lines, bridges, paddles, streamers, cranes, disinfectants, child doctors' instruments, conveyor bands, barometers, iron chips, dynamite, and the underground itself. There were some people who were against the Industrial Revolution. A group of textile workers, named after the slightly mythical figure of Ned or General Ludd, known as the Luddites, helped break machines and stage protests against the use of machinery. They weren't quite against the use of machinery, but worried that they will be mistreated and underutilized and be out of work due to machines. They demanded stuff that may seem reasonable now, such as a minimum wage and minimum labour conditions and a tax to help work towards a worker's pension. But the factory owners of those days found this absurd, and ultimately the Luddites were quelled and the rebellion stopped and the Industrial Revolution roared on. Ultimately, was the Industrial Revolution a success? The Industrial Revolution led to people moving into great big cities such as Manchester and Birmingham, which now provide easiness for urban planning, means that people have access to great shops, amenities, community centres, and an overall better standard of life than they would be if they remained in remote villages. But urban life in Victorian eras was tough and filled with slums, and many areas across the globe still have large big slums such as Rosina or Dharavi across the world today that pose great big issues. The great imperial machine that powered the Industrial Revolution reaped mineral resources from areas such as India and gave them in return violence, subjugation and exploitation of their peoples, even though they also did gain some of the technology from the Industrial Revolution, such as India's great rail network. Whilst the Industrial Revolution did lead to a boom in economic growth, it led to people such as Marx and Friedrich Engels questioning the whole idea of capitalism and saying how modern work is alienated and only benefit those at the top. As Shelley would say, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and this imbalance is greatened, and which led to Marx and Engels in their famous book, The Communist Manifesto, proposing the idea of communism. My horse friend here was put out of a job due to the Industrial Revolution. Once a great big warrior paraded across the streets carrying street-drawn carriages and for land use, now being replaced with tractors and trains. I mean, no wonder he has a long face. In all seriousness, the globe is in my hands and the decision is in yours. No, seriously though, why do you have a long face?